Mabuhay!
We are the third year tourism students of the University of the East Manila.
And we're here to give you information and knowledge about our topics during our midterm period. So stay tuned and enjoy!
To start on our recap for this video, what is civil law? Civil Code of the Philippines is the product of the codification of private law in the Philippines. It is the general law that governs family and property relations in the Philippines. It was enacted in 1950 and remains in force to date with some significant amendments. It is a branch of law that generally deals with the personal and family relations of an individual, his property and succession rights, and the effects of his obligation and contracts. The civil law operates in areas such as family, relations, property, successions, contract, and criminal law, while statutes and principles of common law origin are evident in such areas as constitutional law, procedure, corporation law, taxation, insurance, labor relations, and currency.
Article 19 of the Civil Code of the Philippines, every person must, in the exercise of his rights and in the performance of his duties, act with justice, give everyone his due, and observe honesty and good faith. This provision codifies the concepts of justice and fair play. This prevents a person from abusing the rights that he may otherwise have against another. The law therefore recognizes the primordial limitation on all rights that in the exercise, the norms of human conduct set forth in article must be observed. Article 19 abandoned the old theory that no person can be held liable for damages against another while in the exercise of his or her right, and adopted instead the modern thinking, which is to grant indemnity for damages in cases where there is an abuse of right, even when the act is legal. Law cannot be given an antisocial effect. If mere fault or negligence in one's act can make him liable for injury caused thereby, which can be a tortuous act, with more reason should abuse or bad faith make him liable.
Civil law and criminal law are two broad and separate entities of law with separate set of laws and punishments. Civil law deals with the disputes between individuals, organization, or between the two, in which compensation is awarded to the victim, while the criminal law is the body of law that deals with crime and the legal punishment of criminal offenses. Examples of criminal law include cases of theft, assault, robbery, trafficking in controlled substances, murder, etc. And the type of punishment, a guilty defendant is punished by fines or in exceptional cases, the death penalty. Civil law applies to cases of negligence or malpractice, for example, landlord and tenant disputes, divorce proceedings, child custody proceedings, property disputes, personal injury, and etc. This is the type of punishment civil litigation usually involves some type of compensation for injuries or damages as well as disposition of property and other disputes.
So now let's talk about the Civil Code related to tourism. The Republic Act of 386, also known as the Civil Code of the Philippines, is the product of codification of private law in the Philippines. It is the general law that governs family and property relations in the Philippines. It was enacted in 1950 and remained in force to date with some significant amendments. The Civil Code Persons and Family Relations. The Chapter 2 of the Civil Code was formulated to indicate certain norms that spring from the fountain of good conscience that will serve as golden threads through society to the end of the law may approach its supreme ideal, which is way and dominance of justice. The primary precept of this portion is derived from Justinian's Institute. The precept of law are these: to live honestly, to injure no one, and to give to each his own. Civil personality defines the distinction between natural and juridical persons, as well as the difference between juridical capacity and capacity to act. And the next one is the Family Code of 1983. The Family Code of 1987, which was intended to to supplant Book of the Civil Code concerning persons and family relations. The Family Code covers fields of significant public interest, especially the laws on marriage, the definition, that requisite for marriage, along with the grounds for annulment, are found in the Family Code. As it the law on conjugal property relations, rules on establishing filiations, and the governing provision on support, parental authority, and adoption. And the second to the last bodies of civil code is the property ownership, and its modification focuses on property, which classifies and defines the different kinds of procurable objects, provide for their acquisition, and laws and threats, the nature and consequence of real right. Ownership is dependent in general right of the person to control a thing, particularly in its possession, enjoyment, disposition, and recovery, subject to no restriction except those imposed by the state or private persons, without prejudice to the provision of the law. Lastly, the modes requiring ownership and the civil code. Ownership is acquired by occupation, and by intellectual creation. Ownership and other real rights over property are acquired and transmitted by law, by donation, by testate and intestate succession, and in consequence of certain contracts by tradition. They may also acquired by acquisitive prescription.
What is obligation and contracts? According to the Civil Code of the Philippines under Article 1156, obligation is a judicial necessity to give, to do, or not to do, the obligation to carry out what is required by law, commitment, or contracts. It's a connection that binds us to pay or do something in accordance with the country's law and customs. Obligation of contracts refers to the legal duty of contracting parties to fulfill the promises specified in their contracts. If the obligation of the contracts are in question, a person's reasonable capacity to perform or refrain from performing the required task will be taken into consideration. The Civil Code defines contract as between two peoples wherein one person binds himself with respect to the other to give something or render a service. For there to be valid contract, there has to be these three elements: consent, object, and lastly, costs. Obligation and contract refers to what is legally required of each of the parties involved in the contractual agreement. The law requires individuals who enter into legal agreements to uphold their end of the contract. Obligation and contract is important because contracts outline the rights and responsibility of each party, as well as the cost, benefits, and the detail of how the contract may be terminated.
What is partnership under the Civil Code of the Philippines? A partnership is defined by the Philippine Civil Code Article 1767 as a contract between two or more persons that agree to contribute money, property, or in the state to a shared fund to split the profits among themselves. A partnership is a separate legal entity from that of the members in the partnership. What is the purpose of partnership? The purpose of partnership agreement or partnership contract is to establish a business enterprise through a legally binding contract between two or more individuals or other legal entities. This partnership agreement designates the rights and responsibilities of each partner or entity involved.
General law and property. Property law is the area of law that governs the various forms of ownership in real property and personal property. Property refers to legally protected claims to resources such as land and personal property, including intellectual property. Property can be exchanged through contract law, and if property is violated, one could sue under tort labor to protect it. Property is declared to entail obligation of the owner to the community. This is particularly important in the case of farmland, which can be pooled and redistributed to make better use of machinery and increase production. Article 420, the following things are property of the public dominion. Those intended for public use, such roads, canals, rivers, torrents, ports, and bridges constructed by the states, banks, shores, road street, and other similar character. Second, those which belong to the states without being for public use and are intended for some public service for the development of the community.
The law of sales aims to understand the various rights, obligations, as well as the consequences in entering into a contract of sale. Sale is a contract, therefore, a general rule, it is perfected from the time there is a meeting of the mind of parties. The parties in this kind of contract are called the vendor or the seller and the vendee the buyer. Both have obligation to each other. The vendor is obliged to deliver and transfer ownership, while the vendee pays the price. Therefore, there shall be legal consequences when this obligation is breached.
The law, Article 1458, by the contract of sale, one of the contracting parties obligates himself to transfer ownership and to deliver a determinate thing, and other to pay, therefore a price certain in money or its equivalent. A contract of sale may be absolute or conditional, unrestricted or limited by condition. Essential elements, sale, by its very nature, is a consensual contract because it is perfected by mere consent. The essential elements of contract of sales are the following. First, consent or meeting of the minds, that is consent to transfer ownership in exchange for the price. Second, determine subject matter or the object. And lastly, the third, price certain in money or its equivalent. The term equivalent may refer to check of other negotiable instruments. In relation to tourism, travel, and hospitality industry, agreements arising from contracts will have to be made, and potential breach from these agreements will be encountered. A contract of sale is one of the usual contracts being encountered by the industry concerned. This will give you an overview of the different sales transactions, which may be encountered, including the remedies of the parties concerned.
Common or public carrier, it is in the Article 1732 of the Civil Code of the Philippines. It means that one must be either be a person, corporation, firms, or association and must be in the business of carrying or transporting both goods or passenger from one another place to another, and offer their services to the public either by land, water, or air for compensation, offering their services to the public. If you have ever spent time on a bus, taxi cab, commercial airplane, passenger train, or cruise ship, you have been on a common carrier.
What is taxation or tax law? Tax law in the Philippines covers national and local taxes. National taxes refers to national internal revenue taxes imposed and collected by the national government through the Bureau of International Revenue or BIR, and local taxes refer to those imposed and collected by the local government.
Purpose of taxation, the primary purpose is to provide funds or property with which the state promotes the general welfare and protection of citizens, and the secondary purposes, first, to strengthen anemic enterprises by giving tax exemptions, second, to promote local industries against foreign competition through imposition of high custom duties on imported goods, third, to reduce inequalities in wealth and income by imposing progressively higher tax, and fourth, to prevent inflation by increasing taxes or ward off depression by decreasing taxes.
What is the importance of tax law? The Philippine government relies on tax revenue to fund its operations and finance its development projects. Being the lifeblood of the government, tax revenue is a critical part of the country's economic and fiscal policy. Aside from the revenue that taxes generate, they also help promote economic stability and growth. By imposing taxes on goods and services, the government can discourage unnecessary consumption and production and ensure that resources are used more efficiently. The Philippines uses taxes to redistribute income and wealth in the society. Progressive taxation systems, for instance, tax higher incomes at higher rates to reduce inequality. The purpose of taxes is for the government to use such by spurring economic growth through investment in different industries and projects, which is generate a source of sustainable funding for social programs and public investments. You can think of your taxes as a capital fund that the government uses to generate revenue and improve society.
Next is doctrines of taxation. So there are 4 doctrines of taxation. First is lifeblood doctrine. Second, necessity theory. Third, benefits received principle. Fourth is doctrine of symbolic relationship. So I am going to discuss the first 2. So lifeblood doctrine, it is said that taxes are what we pay for civilization. Without taxes, the government would be paralyzed or lack of motive power to activate and operate it. Hence, despite the natural reluctance to surrender part of one's hard-earned income to the taxing authorities, every person who is able to must contribute his share in the running of the government for its part is expected to respond in the form of tangible and intangible benefits intended to improve the lives of the people and enhance their moral and material values. Second is necessity theory. The power to tax is an attribute of sovereignty emanating from necessity. It is necessary burden to preserve the state sovereignty and a means to give the citizenry an army to resist aggression, a navy to defend its shore from invasion, a corps of civil servants to serve public improvements designed for the enjoyment of the citizenry and those which come within the state's territory, and facilities and protection which government is supposed to provide. And also the exercise of the power to tax emanates from necessity because without taxes, the government cannot fulfill its mandate of promoting the general welfare and well-being of the people.
The benefits received principle. Taxpayers receive benefits from taxes through the protection of the state affords to them. For the protection they get arises their obligation to support the government through payment of taxes. Also, the benefits received principle, which is a theory of income tax fairness that says people should pay taxes based on the benefits they receive from the government. Also, is it a tax provision that says a donor who receives a tangible benefit from making a charitable contribution must subtract the value of the benefit from the amount claimed as an income. The symbiotic relationship doctrine that involves the power of the state to demand and receive taxes based on the reciprocal duties of the support and protection between the state and its citizen. Every person who is able must contribute his share in the burden of running the government. The government, for its part, expected to respond in the form of tangible and intangible benefits, intended to improve the lives of the people and enhance their material and moral values. Also, it has no special benefits to taxpayers are not required. A person cannot object to or resist the payment of taxes solely because no personal benefit to him can be pointed out arising from the tax.
What is income tax? The term income tax refers to a type of tax governments impose on income businesses and individuals within their jurisdiction generate. By law, taxpayers must file an income tax return annually to determine their tax obligations. Income tax are the source of revenue for governments. They are used to fund public services, pay government obligation, and provide goods for the citizens. In addition to the federal government, many states and local jurisdictions also levy income taxes.
What is corporate tax? Corporate tax obligations consist of both direct and indirect taxes. Direct taxes are typically expressed as fractions of corporate income, whereas indirect taxes include sales tax, value-added taxes, exercise taxes, property taxes, payroll taxes, and import and export duties. Corporate indirect tax payments exclusive of payroll taxes commonly exceed their direct tax payments in overall magnitude. Much of the interest in corporate taxation nevertheless turns on the direct tax component, since the indirect taxes, such as value-added taxes, are imposed on all businesses' activities, whether or not undertaken by corporations.
Travel tax is a levy imposed by the Philippine government on individuals who are leaving the country, irrespective of the place where the air ticket is issued and the form of place of payment, as provided for the Presidential Decree 1183 as amended. Pursuant to Section 7.3 of Republic Act No. 9593, 50% of the proceeds from travel tax collections shall accrue to the TIESA. 40% shall accrue to the Commission of Higher Education for tourism-related educational programs and courses, and the 10% shall accrue to the National Commission for Culture and Arts.
So what is VAT? And how is it applicable in tourism? VAT or value-added tax is a form of sales tax. It is a consumption tax that is levied on the product repeatedly at every point of sales at which value has been added. That is, the tax is added when a raw material producer sells a product to a factory, when the factory sells to its finished product to the wholesaler, when the wholesaler sells it to the retailer, and finally when the retailer sells it to the customer who will use it. So VAT is applicable in tourism because it returns the expenses used in the products or services that the tourism industry serves to its tourists or guests. That's all. Thank you!
Maraming salamat! Choose Tourism! Choose UE Manila!